In my other video, I created these swatches, different planting swatches, and I'd like to use those within the different garden areas of this planting plan. But I also want to use a few other background swatches in my patterns. And I thought that I would show you guys how to create a seamless texture from a pattern. So this comes from the graphic refs that you guys have in the folder that you got at the beginning of the year. This is in Photoshop and textures, and it's just this texture here. So I'm going to show you how to actually create not just a pattern, but a seamless pattern. So you might remember from the very beginning of our design media class that you can define a pattern just by selecting any image in Photoshop. And I just did that with Control A to select all. And you can go to Edit and Define Pattern. And that will just take the entire selection and turn it into a pattern swatch. So I could do watercolor texture here and press OK and save it. So I can go into my patterns palette and you see it shows up right here. But when I go to apply the pattern, this isn't going to be seamless because there's all these different edges, and when they meet and overlap, they're going to have lines in between them. So I'll just demonstrate what that would look like. Let's just take this lawn layer and we'll double click here and go to pattern overlay. And I will choose this pattern, which we just created. And I'll zoom in. Right now, the scale is fine for this scale of sight, but you can see here there's a big line between the light and the dark areas of the pattern. So if I make this even a little bit smaller, you see that it just doesn't work that well as a seamless pattern because we're always going to have that division between where the bright side ends and where it tiles it together with the next dark side. So to overcome that, basically what you want to do is select a part of your image that has relatively even lighting. So I'm going to just press M for marquee, or you can grab it from up here and make sure it's the rectangular marquee. And I'm going to make a selection. Maybe I'll do a rectangular selection like this. And I'm going to select what I think is pretty even, relatively even lighting conditions. First, I'm going to press C for crop, and that's going to bring up the crop preview, and it will automatically go to the boundaries of our selection. If it doesn't, just make sure that this little drop-down box says selection. And I'm going to press enter twice. Now it's cropped to this area. So the next thing I'm going to do is go to Filter, Other, and Offset. I have mine here set to 500 and 500 pixels. So this is going to depend on the size of your base image. Mine was pretty big, so I have it set to 500, but maybe if your base file is small, you might need to reduce this on both sides. Just make sure that you can see a cross section where you see how the image is going to be tiled together. So basically what this is doing is it's moving the image down by, in this case, 500 and 500 pixels, and it's sliding it from this corner down 500 and over 500. And then it's set to wrap around. So basically wherever it gets cut off here, it's going to wrap around on the other side. This way we get a preview of what this crossing area looks like. So when we tile it together as a pattern, this kind of shows us what it will look like. So I'm going to go OK and just press V to get out of my crop preview. And basically what we want to do is mitigate the differences between these edges so that they are more even. So one way to do that would be to, again, use the marquee. I'm going to press M for marquee and select this whole area along this line, and then go to Image, Fill, and try Content Aware Fill. That's going to grab content from around this area and try to make that line less obvious. So let's see what happens. Okay, so you see it has basically tried to match the pattern as much as it can, and that works pretty well. You cannot really see the line anymore. So I'm going to do that again on this area here and go Edit, Fill, and Content Aware. and see if it can work on this side as well. Okay, so that worked really well for this particular pattern. But if it doesn't work for yours, there's a few other things you can do. One thing you can do is use the spot healing brush here, where you can basically you use the parentheses to make it bigger, and you can press down Alt to take a sample from an area, and then you can brush it in, and it will basically try to blend and match the area that you're brushing over. So I think that didn't work that well over here, but it worked pretty okay over here. So I'm just going to do it again. I'm going to grab a sample area by pressing click, or by pressing Alt and clicking over here. And then I'm just going to kind of heal these areas and blend them a little bit better. So we can be confident that this is going to work as a seamless pattern. So let's run that filter one more time just to be sure that we haven't missed any other overlap. So I'm going to go filter, other, offset. And if I look at my preview, I don't really see that many obvious overlaps, but I'm just going to fix up this area here where the red and the white kind of aren't really blended together. So I'm going to use my content aware fill to try to blend this area. So I will go to edit, fill, content aware, and see if this can help me. So it just offered a little bit extra refinement. I'm going to go in again with my spot healing brush and just fix that up a little bit more so it doesn't look like such a border. There. One thing we should double check just before we continue is the image size here. So if I go to save as, and I just go to JPEG and keep this the same way it is, I'm just going to append a 1 here so it doesn't save over the original. I just want to get a preview of how big this file is. So it's 2.3 megabytes at its largest size. And if we were going to use this as a pattern file in a rendered plan, this might get quite large. So we actually want to reduce this in size as much as we possibly can. So I'm going to cancel out of that. And I'm going to look at the image size and just see how big it is. So right now, you can see the pixel dimensions are 2314 by 1577. It's 32 centimeters by 22 centimeters. I think that that's way too big for what we really need it. So I'm just going to bring this down to maybe 20 centimeters maximum on the long edge and keep this locked together so that it scales it accordingly. And I'm just going to go OK. OK. And then I'm going to go File and Export and Save for Web Legacy. This is just going to give me a little bit more control over the size. So we can see now the image size down here as a preview is 225.6 kilobytes. I have my quality set to 60, and that should be totally fine. It still looks really good. I'm not worried about it having not enough resolution. So this is fine for me, and I'm just going to click Save, and I'll give it an S for small. That's saved to the original file. So to make sure that our texture is actually the small size one, we're going to have to go to the place that we saved it. So I have it right here. It's the one that's appended with an S. And I'm just going to drag it in to my Photoshop document. And I'm going to press Control A and edit, define pattern. And OK. So make sure that after you've saved a small version of your file that you reopen it in Photoshop and use that to create your pattern instead of going back to the original one that you cropped, because that one, not totally sure why, but it seems to still create quite a large texture file. So you have to actually reopen the smaller version in Photoshop before you continue. And now I will Control A and I will define that pattern. And I'm just going to go back into my patterns palette and get rid of the old one. Okay, so now we have a small, usable, seamless texture that is a watercolor pattern. But I'm pretty sure that I might want to use this for a paving or something, but I'm pretty sure this isn't going to work for vegetation. So I'm actually going to give it a color. So I'm going to use, I'm going to do two things. The first thing I'm going to do is make it black and white. I'm going to use Shift-Control-U to make it black and white. I'm going to go Control-A to select everything, and then I'm going to define that as that. And then I'm going to just Control-Z to get back to the original coloration, and I'm going to do a Control-Alt-U, which is Hue Saturation Panel, and I'll make sure Colorize is checked off. And I want to do one that's going to be appropriate for sky or water, so this color blue is just fine. You can move your sliders around to suit the color that you want. I'll press OK, Control-A to select everything, and then define pattern. And then I'm going to Control-Z back and do that one more time with green. Maybe this kind of olivey, yellowy green. I'll just darken it a tiny bit here. Okay. Control-A and define pattern. So now if we look at our patterns, we have the original, we have a black and white version in case we just wanted to do a texture overlay and put it on a blend mode. We have one that is appropriate for water texture and one that is more of a vegetation layer. I'm going to go back to the watercolor swatches that I did this morning. And the first thing I'm going to do is unlock this layer and do a Control-T transform just to rotate it a tiny bit so it's more vertical, so that when I do my selections, they're not off center. So I'm going to press M for marquee, and then starting from the upper corner here, I'm going to press down Shift to constrain the proportions and select a square. And I will just make it a little bit smaller than the swatch itself. We would just press C for crop and crop it down like that, and then export that as a smaller file. And then I'm going to Control-Z until I'm back to my main file. So if I want to make sure all of the swatches are the same size, I can just press M for marquee again, and with my cursor inside the selection, I can drag it over to the next square here. So I'll just move it around so that it suits me, and then I will press C for crop, enter twice, save that small. Before we define this texture as a pattern, I want to actually make it seamless. I'm going to make all of them seamless. So I've opened up all of the little swatches that I saved out, and I'm going to try to mitigate some of their overlapping tendencies, just so that we don't have to worry about them in our planting plan, kind of having these lines in between the tiles. So I'm going to just go through and do this really quickly using the filter, other, and offset. And then I'm going to go in and try to do my best to mitigate these border areas.